And we are live. Hey up. Uh, Welcome to the Sofa Cast with me, Mike Silver, and Luciano.
Hey guys, how's it going?
And I'm in and ahhing about starting this podcast for quite a while now, and some of you probably saw that I did a very scientific Twitter poll, and I think about 86% of I can't remember how many people voted now, but I think it was about 86 people were up for this. And when I asked who would like to co-host, Luciano, well, you were very graciously said that you would be up for it almost straight away.
I was very excited because I did a political podcast in the past named The Benito Juarez Experience, which I did with Dr. Joam Navarro Rivera, who is a Hispanic humanist who lives in the United States. And that podcast isn't actually over, but it's just that it's on an indefinite hiatus while Dr. Joam Navarro Rivera and I figure out our schedules. I very much enjoy being on podcasts as both like a host or a co-host and as a guest. I've been on a whole bunch of different podcasts as a guest speaker, and it's been a whole lot of fun. So I'm really excited to be back in and to be helping to lead another political podcast.
Yeah, and I'm very pleased to have you on board. It's it's brilliant. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I am Luciano Joshua Gonzalez Vega. If you are a stickler for pronouncing people's names the way they prefer to be pronounced, you can call me Luciano, but that's not a thing that ever really bothers me. Most of my friends either call me Joshua, which is my middle name, or Luciano. I'm not a stickler for that sort of thing, but I live in Washington, D.C., and I work for the American Atheist as an intern. I do a lot of social media and communication stuff, and I'm a graduate student studying peace and conflict studies. I've worked on a variety of political things over in the United States. I've helped with political campaigns. I've done messaging work, and I've also written editorials and opinion pieces for political candidates.
Brilliant. So you've certainly got lots of credentials, and you've certainly been very busy, and you seem to be living right in the hub of things in Washington, D.C.
Very much so. Living in Washington, D.C. is a very interesting experience under this administration. I had visited D.C. in the past. My family is military, and I live with them right now. So I visited them in the past when I was an undergraduate student, and I would get to see like a whole lot of really neat things. Coming to visit DC is definitely extraordinarily different from living in it, because DC is big enough that like it feels like its own little part of the world as opposed to one city. If you go from one part of the city to another, then you are going to have a wildly different experience. And it's kind of discombobulating if you lived in places that are pretty much the same throughout the whole place. Like I've lived in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is a decently sized city, but it's mostly homogenous unless you go to like the outer parts of the city, and then you're going to start to see things that are really different. But in DC, you can cross a street and you can be exposed to a whole different culture.
Oh, I see. It sounds amazing. I'd love to visit sometime. And my name is Mike, also known as Black Sofa, and I've been running the Black Sofa vlog channel on YouTube since January, and it's been going quite well. I've got over 180 subscribers now, and it started out as me just talking about depression and anxiety and mental health issues, but then inevitably I started talking about my and leaving, because I was in the process of leaving the faith when I first started. So inevitably I started talking about that and started talking about atheistic issues. And but now it's become I've become more focused on atheism and making reaction videos. And but I'm very passionate about politics as well. So I wanted to do some around politics and current affairs. And so I came up with an idea of doing a monthly, podcast, here on YouTube as well. And so I sounded my followers out on Twitter, and as I said at the beginning, 86% of the people who voted wanted this. So I decided to go for it, and I'm very pleased to have you along as a co-host.
I'm really happy to be here. So the way that the podcast that I was on and the way this podcast work are going to be very different, because the podcast that I was on before, I was on it for, it was almost a year and a half actually. We did almost 60 something episodes, and we talked about things on a weekly basis. For the first 9 months of the podcast, it was consistent. Every single week we'd upload an episode. And that's definitely very intensive. I think that having this approach to a podcast makes a lot more sense, especially if the two people who are making the podcast don't live in the same time zone, which is very obviously the case for the two of us. But also, it's nice to have time to analyze political stories with a level of thoroughness, which you don't have if you're trying to analyze the last week. If you're doing a weekly podcast, it's difficult because political stories are not like other types of stories. Like, political stories take time to saturate and be reacted to, especially if it's something like over in the United States right now. Lots of people are having a discussion about birthright citizenship, and the way that the journalism industry in the United States works, it's very much the norm for people to react to things instantaneously. But the reality is, if you hear someone talk about birthright citizenship like Donald Trump, then you're going to need time to analyze whether or not those statements are actually correct. And there are lots of statements that are just blatantly false that you can react to immediately. But there's also stories that it's going to take time to figure out whether or not the story is actually something that can happen, or if it's just a politician saying something for the headlines and to distract from other ongoing events.
Yeah. So what is the big story happening in the States at the moment?
Right now, I would say probably the two big stories that are happening right now are the immigrant caravan and the birthright citizenship. But other smaller stories that are happening in the background are Trump has a new person that he is probably going to nominate. As of the time of this recording, I haven't seen anything saying that she's officially been nominated to the UN position to be the UN ambassador. But Trump apparently has a new favorite. And that's a really important thing that, as a peace and conflict person, I'm interested in. Unfortunately, I haven't had the time to sit down and do the research for this, because this happened yesterday. Or at the very least, yesterday was the first time that I saw someone reporting on it.
Oh, right. Sounds interesting. What's happening with the midterms?
So the midterms are very interesting because a lot of the coverage that I had seen, especially during the Kavanaugh nomination and that honestly nightmarish process, there was initially a lot of headway for the Democrats. It seemed like the Democrats were going to lose the battle, but possibly win the war, because it was pretty clear that Kavanaugh was going to be confirmed to the Supreme Court. And obviously he has been, unfortunately. But what happened after was kind of interesting, because there was, in the moment of frustration that caused for a lot of Democrats, there was a lot of research showing that Democrats felt energized and had purpose and were going to go to turn out. And in fairness, that actually seems to be the case. There's some research showing in places like Texas and Georgia that younger and more democratic leaning groups are turning out more in the early voting, which is very exciting, especially in Georgia, where in Georgia, in addition to Kavanaugh, there was also one of the people who was running for governor, the attorney general, I'm pretty sure. I'm going to have to go back and double check that just to be sure. But the attorney general was apparently removing people from the voter rolls. So he was making people have to re-register. And that's something that was infuriating a lot of people, but it seems like it might have had the opposite results, because the initial research is suggesting that younger turnouts and turnouts of the people who were removed from the voting rolls appears to be up, at least as of right now.
So, is there going to be a blue wave, do you think?
If I'm being optimistic, I would say that the Democrats are going to take the House, possibly gain a seat in the Senate. But the reality is, I think that if I'm being more pragmatic, I have a feeling that the House is going to be mostly blue, almost half and half. Maybe one person or two people will be more for one side than the other. So maybe the Republicans will keep the House just barely, or the Democrats will win the House, but not by like a decisive margin. And then in the Senate, they're going to close the gap. But I don't think that they're going to take both houses. That's an extremely unlikely scenario.
Okay. For British listeners who may not be familiar with the way that American politics works, what would that mean for Donald Trump if the House becomes mostly blue?
So if the House becomes if the Democrats take the House, or if they almost take the House, and there are a handful of moderate Republicans who would be willing to sometimes vote with them, it would not cripple Donald Trump's power, but it would put a severe limit on what it is that he can do without using executive actions or executive orders. And that's because our bicameral system right now works in his favor, because he has both the Senate and the House. But if we gain either one of them, then we will have, at the very least, we, the Democrats, will have an ability to more effectively serve as a roadblock for Donald Trump. Donald Trump will have to be willing to give us actual concessions in order to make things happen legislatively, unless he wants to force things through with his own powers in his own office, which is entirely possible, but would not be a particularly popular thing for him to do.
Okay. So, who in the Democrats do you like at the moment?
So I'm a progressive, and I'm not going to lie about that. So the people that I like are progressives like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, especially for me as a Puerto Rican, is someone that I like a whole lot, because she is a young, progressive, dynamic politician who is out there making things happen. I don't think that she is like the perfect politician. I don't think that there's anyone in office right now, or anyone who could be elected, as far as I know, who is like a perfect politician. But among the more moderate Democrats, I like most of the Democrats in the Senate. One of the people that I really like is Cory Booker. And Cory Booker, I feel like he kind of straddles the line between between progressive and moderate. So he is somewhere in the middle within the context of the Democrats, which is a very interesting position to be in. He's someone that I pay a whole lot of attention to, although there were frustrating things that happened with him when he was trying to, if I were to interpret this less charitably, I would say that he was probably trying to get attention when Brett Kavanaugh was being confirmed. And it makes sense that he was doing that. I don't disagree with that action. But the thing that frustrates me is that there were more important things to do than grapple and volley for attention and make clear who is probably going to be running for president in 2020. And that's what a lot of people think. A lot of people think in the aftermath of the Brett Kavanaugh nomination, there are some people who are going to be running for president in the Democratic side. Two of the main people that I heard are Amy Klobuchar, who is a Democratic senator, and Cory Booker, who is another Democratic senator.
Okay, so as far as the UK goes, the big news at the moment is Brexit. And what do you know about Brexit?
So I know that with Brexit right now, there are, at the very least, my understanding is that for the last couple of months to probably the last year or so, people have been trying to figure out whether there is going to be what is a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit. And I heard these terms explained very badly, but basically the way that I heard them explained was that a soft Brexit is a softer way to leave the EU while trying to keep things with the EU nice and trying to gain the most convenient things from the EU, such as people from Britain being able to go to the rest of the EU without having to get a whole lot of documentation, making it easier for people to travel to and from the UK and all of that area, and things like currency and trade agreements. And people who want a hard Brexit are people who want to sever ties off completely, renegotiate everything. But I also know that that's what some members of the EU are pushing for, and that if that's the case, what would effectively happen is that that is a hardline exit. And that would make sense from the EU's point of view, because the EU would want to dissuade other nations that are thinking of leaving from trying to leave, just like the UK is doing.
Yeah. So what Theresa May is trying to push at the moment is something called the Chequers deal, which is the Brexit plan agreed at Chequers, which is where the Prime Minister lives, where she isn't staying at number 10. That basically is the softer Brexit. The UK will basically maintain a common rule book for all goods with the EU, including agricultural products after Brexit. The problem is Theresa May's backbenchers are the Brexiteers among the backbenchers, people like I can't, my mind's gone blank, but there are basically hard Brexiteers who, in her own party, the Conservatives, who are rebelling against this. They say that there is not a true Brexit, and they're putting pressure on her to deliver a hard Brexit, basically. And on the other side of the coin, if you like, her negotiations with the EU are not going very well. They're basically, being very stubborn, apparently, and she's not looking very competent.
She's in a fairly difficult place, because I don't know if I'm under the assumption that she's a Brexit supporter, but I don't actually know that she is. The optics of leaving the EU makes sense if you are someone who is a conservative in any context. But at the same time, if you want to maintain trade negotiations, and if you want your group of people to be able to continue to reap the benefits of being in the EU, you have to understand that if you're trying to leave the EU is going to push back, especially because they're worried that this could set a precedent for other nations. And if they are soft, or if they are generous right now, because they also benefit from the UK being in there, so they can't push extraordinarily hard. But at the same time, like, this could lead to the collapse of the European Union. This could be the first step that leads to everything falling apart. So they have to be weary of a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, I mean, one commentator, I can't remember who it was, but he likened the Chequers deal that Theresa May is trying to push for For say say if you were the member of a golf club and you said to them, I no longer want to pay the golf club fee, but I still want to use the golf course. That's basically what Theresa May is pushing for, and the EU are saying no, we're not having that. They're being stubborn, and it's looking like we're going to have to leave the EU with no deal whatsoever. And people are saying that if we leave with no deal, it will be a disaster.
The thing that really sucks about all of this, I wrote an article for the Carolinian, which is the student newspaper of the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, where I talked about the Chequers deal, but I didn't talk about the Chequers deal all that much. The main thing that I focused on was the optics of the Donald Trump visit in, like, I'm inclined to say it was in July, but it might have very well been in August. And I remember reading about what the president of the United States did, and it was really frustrating because, like, basically, if you are either a Theresa May supporter or Theresa May herself, and you're looking at the situation, what it effectively amounted to was having tiny bits of success one by one, actually making the Chequers deal, and then, like, it being undermined by the foolishness of the president of the United States. And if you're an American, this probably isn't that big of a deal to you. But if you are someone in the UK, or for whatever reason you like the idea of the Brexit and you like the idea of renegotiating these huge multinational agreements, then you have to understand the dangers of this, because the president of the United States went over to the UK over the summer and he undermined what the British Prime Minister was doing. And one of the things that I'm thinking is that I have no doubt that Theresa May is waiting for an opportunity to get revenge in some form for that. Because I know that if I were a politician and someone did that to me, I would wait, but I would be sure to lash out if I had a moment when I could. So I know that at some point, Theresa May is probably going to renegotiate some deal with the United States, or she's going to do something to undermine American/estadounidense, which is Spanish for United Statesian, authority in some way. And honestly, I'm kind of looking forward to it, because it was really messed up when the president of the United States went to the UK and effectively slammed the British Prime Minister just because he disagreed with how she was, like, negotiating this really complex thing, which I disagree with. I think the Brexit's dumb, but it wasn't cool of the president to do that.
No, it wasn't. And she's under pressure from the opposition now, because the Labour Party are now saying that if she doesn't manage to get a deal, they're going to try to force a snap election, and they're going to put the idea of a new referendum on the table, a referendum based on the fact that there's no deal, and do we still want to leave the EU with no deal? And so she's under pressure from all sides at the moment. And apparently, even Laura Koonsberg, one of the BBC, one of the journalists for the BBC. I think she's actually one of the chief political correspondents for the BBC, who has some people say that she's quite she's quite right wing. She's got a right wing bias, and she's biased against Jeremy Corbyn, and she's more in favour of the Tory party. But but even she now is beginning to admit that Theresa May has become very evasive in the Prime Minister question times. She's managed. She said on a live news program recently that she is very good at evading questions from the opposition, and while answering them in such a way that she doesn't actually say anything. So for her to say, Laura Kunzberg to say that, to criticize the prime minister so harshly, that this is a big thing, because she's up until now she's pretty much been on her side.
So I think it's worth going back a second and explaining the concept of a snap election, because my understanding of a snap election is that it is the equivalent of what is known in the United States as a special election. But the difference is a snap election, from my understanding, is an election that can apparently be forced to happen and is a fairly substantial election, whereas a special election in the United States is what happens when someone either steps down from their post, dies in their post, someone who's an elected official, obviously, or gets nominated and is either in the Senate or in the Congress and needs a replacement. So can you take a second and explain what a snap election is for any of the other Americans who might not have that much awareness of British politics?
Okay, so snap election is, you summed it up quite well, actually. A snap election is when an election is forced to happen because before the 5-year term is up. Mm-hmm. Basically, and we had one recently.
Yep.
And because Theresa May took a gamble, she wanted to get an even stronger majority in the House of Commons, so that she'd have a better
negotiating, so she could negotiate better for the form of Brexit she wanted.
Yeah, a stronger negotiating stance, against the EU. But it backfired on her. She actually lost seats, and she needed to lean on the
UKIP, right?
No, not UKIP, the DUP, which is I think they're an Irish political party, quite right-leaning, I believe, and they had the 10 seats that that she needed to to form a working government, basically. So it backfired on her, and so if she knows that if there was another snap election, she would lose, because she's very unpopular now, and the Labour Party are hoping that they will gain enough seats to form a majority government themselves. So yeah, she's under a lot of pressure at the moment.
So I think that a good idea in future episodes would be for us to take a moment at the beginning to briefly explain, especially if some of the stories we're talking about in that specific episode or that specific month are a little bit stranger, because I have a feeling that since the next time we film this, we're going to be talking about the midterms in the United States, at the very least. That's one of the things we're going to be talking about. It'd be good for us to sit down and have a second at the beginning of each episode where we very briefly talk about the terms we're going to be using, because I know that everyone's familiar with politics in the United States, because politics in the United States is a thing that people pay attention to in the media. There's shows like Designated Survivor, and there's shows like House of Cards especially, that are extraordinarily popular, and they're not an accurate representation of politics, but they're an accurate enough representation of politics in the United States that people can get an idea of what politics in the United States looks like. But if we're talking about politics in Canada or politics in Honduras, both of which I pay a decent amount of attention to, or if we're paying or if we're talking about politics in the UK, places that people and some of our listeners aren't going to be super familiar with, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea for us to just like go over it in the beginning. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, actually. Yeah, well, it'll be a learning curve for both of us, I think.
It's going to be a lot of fun, though. And I'm also super excited to see that there's some folks talking in the comments section. Hey, Shane and Spooky. It's a great YouTube name.
Hi, guys. Thanks for joining.
I wanted to be more active in the comments section, and like I'm reading the comments, but I just like I wanted to not be heard, because when I was in the live stream yesterday with Wonder Lady and with Christine and with Gray and Max Skeptic, you could hear me typing, and if I mute my microphone, that's fine, but then sometimes I like want to say something really quick, so I have to like hop and unmute the microphone. So I've stayed off the comments today, but in future episodes I'll try better to be in both.
Yeah, me too. But we've only had a few viewers, so I didn't think it was, but hopefully next time we'll get more viewers, so we'll get more interaction.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to, like, I know that right now, I've mentioned this off stream, but I have like a blog where I talk about a whole bunch of stuff. And both the blog I have on my website and my Pathos blog get a decent number of like reads. So I'm definitely going to be advertising this now that we've done our first episode and we have the format. We're like experimenting with the format. I think it's going to be a good review for people who pay some attention to politics, but don't pay like a huge amount of attention to politics, especially if we only do it once a month. So we have like a whole bunch of stories to go over each episode.
Yeah, I think it's going to be good. Anyway, thanks again for co-hosting, Luciano, and thanks to our viewers for tuning in, and I think we'll wrap things up there, and we'll do this. Do this again next month.
We're also definitely going to be like filming other videos. I have a schedule for next week. I've already filmed some videos, so I'm going to be sending people over here as well, and I'm going to be advertising this pretty hard once we know, especially since it's going to be the first Friday of every month. So our next one's going to be in 36-ish days. It's going to be on the 7th of December.
Yeah,
and that's definitely a whole bunch of time for us to get lots of stories. But at the same time, if you guys find stories that you want us to cover, sorry, GI, you did in fact miss the show. We're wrapping it up, but we're gonna be talking about other stuff online. But if folks have stories they want us to cover, I would absolutely love to get them. I also know that I'm gonna be doing live streams. I'm going to try to do my first live stream by myself on my birthday, which is in 2 Fridays from today. It's November 16th. I don't know how that's going to go, so I'm not going to like make any promises. But I am really excited. I'm going to be talking to people. I'm going to invite you and a couple of other folks to come on if I can make it happen. So that's fun.
Brilliant. So yeah, thanks to everyone who tuned in, and until next time, bye for now.
We'll see you guys around. We hope that you guys come and check out the full show once it's uploaded, especially if you came on late. And it seems like a good number of people jumped on at the last minute, but our next episodes are probably going to be longer than this. So don't worry if you feel bad about missing this one, or if this is a time that doesn't work for you that well. Our next episodes are probably not going to be just 30 minutes. They're probably going to be 30 to 45.
Yeah. And one thing that I want to mention is that what I'm hoping to do is to start a whole separate channel for the Sofa Cast. But I'm in the process of creating that. So maybe next time it will be broadcast from the actual its very own channel. So, but I'll let you know nearer the time Whether that's going to be the case or not. Watch this space.
All right, guys, we'll see you around.
Okay, bye for now.